The 20th century was truly the century of cinema, the century in which it was the dominant entertainment medium in countries all over the world. Today there are so many distractions competing for our leisure time, it's hard to understand the power of film to entertain and inspire audiences all over the world at once. This was once possible in the silent era. Film truly was an international language, and even beyond it. It was a democratic art form. Anyone could see the latest release, from the young to the old, from the poor to the rich. All you needed were a few coins, or even a jam jar would get you your ticket to another world. The democratic art form of the movies, often called the flickers, were looked down upon by the upper classes. In fact, for much of the 20th century, cinema wasn't considered an art form at all. There was a sense that persisted for many years that much of it was disposable. Movies came and went. The companies that made them didn't consider their films had a profitable future beyond their initial release. Once they discovered they had a gold mine of content which future generations might enjoy, or historians might study, it was often too late. Only around 15% of silent films exist today in their entirety, a sad state of affairs caused by neglect, the highly flammable nature of the nitrate stock. And yes, that they were disposable. Often films were burned for the silver content, or even to keep warm in cold winters. Thankfully, the importance of film preservation and restoration has been recognised in more recent times, but there is still a great sadness about what has been lost. There isn't just the entertainment value, but the window on another world, another time. Film is a great art form not just because it can make us laugh, cry, thrill and inspire us, but you can see 1900 come alive, an experience more immediate and universal than a picture painted in that era or a written historical study. So what was the magic of the movies that thrilled audiences across a century? I think it was just that, the experience of seeing moving images in a darkened room with an audience. The ability the movies had of taking you to places you could never see in reality, or getting you to feel you were there with people you would never meet. Today there are so many ways to view films, and virtual reality and computer games is so advanced. It is hard for us to really understand that magic, in an era when foreign travel wasn't an everyday event, and the cinema was the only multimedia art form. The audience was a crucial part of the history of film. It influenced its technological advances and other trends. If film is indeed an art, it's a popular art. It could be argued the technology for sound existed years before the jazz singer, but it was the response to Jolson's prophetic "You ain't heard nothing yet" and natural dialogue which really launched the talkies.
Wait a minute, you ain't heard nothing yet. Wait a minute, I tell you, you ain't heard nothing. You want to hear Toot Toot Tootsie? All right, hold on, hold on. Toot Toot Tootsie, goodbye. Toot Toot Tootsie, don't cry. The little choo-choo train.
The money men certainly knew the power of the audience and responded to it, though not always successfully. The so-called front office tried to force-feed the public with stars, while those people sitting in the dark really made their own. The businessmen were more interested in financial stability than artistry, which brings us to the central conflict between film as a money-making commodity and film as art. It is important to remember these two views of film don't necessarily contradict each other. You don't have to cater to the lowest common denominator to be popular. The greatest achievements of film for me were both artistic and popular. The communal experience of cinema is around 115 years old, but moving images are much older than that. Plays conjured by shadows have been around since Stone Age man discovered the secret of fire. A huge step forward was the invention of the magic lantern in about 1660. By the 1700s, the pictures created by the lantern were starting to move. Shows were on a modest scale at first because of a lack of light in an era before the invention of the electric light bulb. This, however, could often be used to the showman's advantage. One of the most popular types of lantern show was the phantasmagoria, which plunged the audience into darkness and used back projection to suggest caves populated by ghosts and skeletons. This further induced nightmares with noises of thunder and flashes of lightning. New sources of illumination in the 19th century, like limelight, dramatically increased the effectiveness of lantern shows. Photography aided the telling of stories. After 1880, story slides were often posed photographs, which when seen today can easily be mistaken for early motion pictures. Story slides used sets, props, actors and actresses just like movies. A narrator related the plot to the audience. Alexander Black invented what he described as a slow movie, in which 4 slides a minute dissolved together onto the screen. An example of this was Black's picture play of 1894, Miss Jerry, which was a huge success in the period between the invention of the motion picture and its projection onto a screen. Images on the screen are achieved because the brain has a perception threshold below which images exposed to it will appear as continuous. At 24 frames per second, we don't see the lines between each frame. The idea of persistence of vision was known to the ancient Egyptians, but wasn't properly defined until 1824 by Peter Mark Rodgers. This led to a series of optical devices that simulated movement. The thaumatrope was a cardboard disc which combined images on each side into a single picture when it was spun on a piece of thread. The Kinetoscope used a serrated disc with a series of drawings which when rotated gave the impression of movement when viewed through a mirror. And the stroboscope used 2 discs, one slotted, one with the drawings, resulting in an effect like a modern camera shutter. In the 1860s, the Daedalus, which replaced the disc with a strip placed around the wall of a spinning drum, was marketed as the zoetrope. Emil Reno's Praxanoscope of 1876 replaced the slots of the zoetrope with a polygonal drum at its centre, which reflected the rotating images. He used transparent strips and a projecting lens to present animated shows using this system to packed houses in 1892, though it would soon be superseded by the successful projection of moving photographs. Louis Daguerre made still photography a reality from 1839, and attempts were made to combine photography with the optical devices, but were limited by the rather stiff-posed photographs. A series of continuous images was required. Series photography was developed by Edward Mowbridge and Etienne Jules Méry. In 1878, Mowbridge was able to prove whether a galloping horse ever had all 4 hooves off the ground at once by using a battery of cameras activated by tripwires along the Palo Alto racetrack. In 1882, Méry adapted a photographic revolver, which used a revolving plate to record a dozen pictures a second. Eventually, Méry recorded these pictures on the celluloid film roll by the Eastman Kodak Company, still in use today. Méry and George Demany were among many inventors who tried to perfect a machine capable of projecting moving photographs. Thomas Edison wasn't really interested in this or really understood the potential of movies as an entertainment medium. Edison decided to concentrate on the peep show, which he believed would just be another fad in the Victorian era of inventions. He neglected to take out overseas patents, meaning European inventors like Britain's William Fries Green and Germany's Anschutz and Schaldernowski went much further than he did along the road to projection and true cinema. Posterity has given Edison the credit for the invention of the motion picture, but in truth many made contributions. The difference is Edison had many resources to fall back on: a fine workshop at Menlo Park, a large staff and Wall Street backers. In contrast, most inventors led a hand-to-mouth existence. William Fries Green, whose projection apparatus may have only worked in the 1951 biopic The Magic Box, was jailed for bankruptcy and died at a film congress in 1921 with just 2 shillings in his pocket. Woodville Latham & Sons, who invented the Latham loop, which prevented the film from snapping as it passed by the lens, also eventually went bankrupt. George Eastman, who became a millionaire but shot himself. Emile Reynaud, who apparently threw his equipment in the Seine. And Louis Le Prince, who probably was the first to think of perforating the film strip, mysteriously disappeared on a train journey from Dijon to Paris. Edison's kinetoscope of 1892 was a simple slot machine. Dropping a coin in a slot gave life to a tiny picture. Edison built the first motion picture studio in the back garden of his laboratory. This revolving prefabricated building was like a police patrol wagon and was nicknamed the Black Maria. It was here Fred filmed his famous Sneeze, one of the first short joke films produced in 1893 for the kinetoscope parlours. The experience of the kinetoscope was an individual one. The cinema only really began when an audience sat in the dark watching those moving images projected onto a screen. If Edison didn't invent the motion picture, he did commercialise it. In business terms, that is probably more important. When he demonstrated a projector called the Vitascope in 1896, Edison took centre stage for commercial reasons. The machine was actually invented by Thomas Armat. The Lumiere Brothers demonstrated the cinematograph in the basement of the Grand Café on the Boulevard des Capucines in Paris on the 28th of December 1895. During the first few days there was little interest, but soon the shows captured the public's imagination, and within a few weeks the cinematograph was a worldwide success. Anticipating this success, the Lumieres had suitably built up their stock of projectors, and had trained an army of cameramen who both shot and projected films all over the world. The result of this was that within a few years they had access to an incredible total of 1,200 short films. During 1896 the Lumieres introduced this new wonder of the age to all the major cities of the world. In February they opened in London. In April there were presentations in Vienna and Genoa. The cinematograph was demonstrated in Madrid, Belgrade and New York in June. In the second half of 1896, countries as diverse and far apart as Russia, Egypt, Japan, India and Australia experienced the communal nature of cinema for the first time. The world was suddenly a smaller and less complicated place as the cinema transcended barriers of language and national customs. The invention of the motor car and wireless telegraphy also contributed to this new global perspective. But the impact of cinema on international communication cannot be overrated.